Hello, and welcome to another fun-filled Sunday Funday.
Fuck off, asshole! Leave me alone! Don't you know fucking Sunday?
All right, that's awesome. So this is kind of a special episode today. In the last episode, we focused more on kind of an introduction in building things in reactor blocks, and it's something that I think we're going to explore very deeply as we continue forward here. But today's episode is pretty special because it is going over my new favorite drum machine, which I just bought just recently, called Polyplex by the guys over at Twisted Tools. And this is basically a super complex version of something I tend to do almost every day in terms of programming really unique drum sounds inside of something like Battery, or inside of something that stacks various samples together inside of one overall hit or one overall trigger, and you're basically hearing a number of different sounds or a number of different sections of those sounds via that one trigger. And so that's a very oversimplified way of explaining this. And if we just kind of dive into this just a little bit more deeply, I was able to do kind of a little just intro there where you kind of heard just me playing something that just not, I didn't really plan that. I just basically kicked off a little intro section where I was basically just performing a little section on the drums. And it sounds really good, and this is me really just kicking off a preset and not really doing anything to it. And if I go over some of the controls here, I mean, there's a ton of presets available, of course, so you can just thumb through here. And there's something to get started for just about any type of music that you can think of. And the really cool thing about the way that these triggers are set up is that they can be randomized really easily. And by randomize, you see I have the information turned on. This is basically a dice. If it's really small possibly, but basically this is a little dice icon. And the information comes up, says sound randomization. Randomizes the corresponding sounds parameters in the edit section below. Clicking the bar on the right-hand side equals higher grade of randomization, whereas clicking the left side gives you a lesser amount of randomization. So that's something to understand there. Whether you click here or whether you click over here on the dice makes a difference, because this is a slider and there is a degree of control that this has over the randomization, or the degree of the randomization as it's applied. So whether or not you click on the right side or the left side of it closer to the actual dice icon matters. And then only sound settings that have their randomization indicator lit are randomized. So there's an indicator next to it here, and this is the indicator. So enables the pad for global randomization. So it looks like what you can do here is turn it off. So if I play with this, let me just kind of give you an idea of what this does. This is the kick that's sounding right now. Pretty sweet kick. And I just accidentally triggered the snare there, but that's the kick just by itself. Now if I click Mr. Dice, well, now it's completely different. It sounds still pretty equally cool, but what that's basically doing is changing a number of the parameters that you see down below. So if you watch as I click this dice again, keep an eye on some of these settings down here as they're going to change. And obviously a very different sound now that I've clicked that again. I click it a fourth time. Pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. Now what that's doing is changing, as I said, a number of the settings in the features that are down here. And so what some of these things are, if you hover over them, it'll tell you, but a lot of the icons are fairly self-explanatory. So a lot of these things layer on and off. So if you look at this, this is 4 layers, okay? And it's pretty obvious you have 4 rows of information. So starting here all the way on the left, this is 1 layer, and you have control over all these various bits of that single layer from left to right, starting with whether or not that layer is even on or off. And that is, of course, the same for any of the pads. So a number of these pads might be set up for different types of sounds by default. Like you might see kicks and snares kind of kick things off for each of the kits. But then as you progress forward, you might have sort of default settings for various hi-hats, various tom sounds, or other one-shots or sound effects. And that's another thing that just sounds freaking cool. What note is that? That's pretty cool. I really like it. And basically, what you can do is you can randomize these things at any time, right? And you can randomize the entire array of various settings that you have available on these various pads. So you could basically change a number of these settings at once, or you can see there's also dice rollers underneath each of these individual sort of columns as well. So underneath the samples column, for example, you could randomize just this, and what you're doing is you're actually changing only the samples and randomizing just those pieces of information for this particular pad, not necessarily all of the other parts that relate to, say, pitch and start and all the other types of parameters. So another thing to be aware of, it looks like, is with each of these pads, not only do you have a set of main controls, but this is a page selector. So there's a couple of different pages of information here. So you have an envelope section as well, and this is the really, really handy part. This is the part that I would dive into very deeply within something like battery, for example, because I would want to spend a lot of time saying, okay, for the kick, I want you to hear the beginning of this one kick, and I want you to hear the middle, or the subsection of this other kick, and so on and so forth. So I would layer the kick sounds very uniquely for that particular song or that setting, and it would generally, sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But the key there is that it would be very unique, and it would be a complex sound. It would be a layered sound. So that's exactly what this drum machine is designed to do. So that's the really sweet thing about it, is it's designed to do just that, and it makes it really easy to randomize a lot of the features, or to sit here and dial them in exactly the way you want them. The other page is EQ. So another thing, of course you can apply EQ with various plugins and other methods, but you have some EQ, some basic EQ built right into the instrument so that you can dial in particular gain setting, EQ setting for these various elements here: low shelf, low gain, high shelf, and high gain, amongst each of the various pad sounds. So when you're kind of diving into this thing, it's really cool, I think, just to understand what it's capable of, just to thumb through, even though a lot of these may not be your cup of tea per se, just to thumb through the various thumb through the various kits so that you understand what the instrument's capable of. You know what I mean? And just you may not use every bit of it, but diving into a lot of the various sounds that are built into all of these sample libraries will help you understand the way this thing can sound that you may not be aware of. The way that the sample sliders actually work is a little bit tricky, but if you have a careful aim, like the aim of a tattoo artist or someone that's just fairly steady, it's pretty straightforward. So what I've done is I've kind of silenced all of the other sounds so that you just hear this one layer or this first kick sound. And it's pretty basic. There's not much going on there. If I wanted to change just that one layer, I could do that by taking this sample slider and just sliding it to the left or right. So it looks like as I click on it, there's a value that comes up here that you can barely see, but that value says 34. Now, what if I just slide it over to, say, 35? Now that sounds a little bit different. That's literally a different sample. Slide it over to 36. That's a different sample, right? So each of these values, and there's a ton of them in here, you slide it all the way from the left to the right, there's a lot. And then when you get into each of the other, pad areas, there's a lot as well. There's a ton of samples built into this instrument, and that's why there's a ton of presets built in as well that just allow you to understand, the different sounds in here. The navigation is pretty easy too. So as you're within each of the pads, the type is fairly straightforward. If you click on it, the various type options come up, and it's pretty, it's the default settings make sense when you're within each of the kick, and mostly the blue cell, or the very first cell, is your kick. And so that's going to be, the type mostly for each of these. But as you can see, this one has a tom thrown in there. So you can choose any category that you want. There's no limitation. The subcategory is also another subcategorization as well. So as you change this, the samples, or the sample selection over here changes. So now that's just the first sample again. So pretty simple when you're just trying to get in here and play with sounds or choose different sounds. Honestly, you could spend hours, going through this and kind of dialing in something that's just perfect for you. But the beauty of this is not only what you have to do is you have to think about a sample in terms of the entire duration of that sample. So don't think about when you hear just this kick sound, and let me just pick one at random. There, it's decent. So I would say the duration of that kick, sorry, it's a snare. The duration of that kick with the little reverb tail on the end of it is probably about a second long. I could be off there, but somewhere in the area of maybe 3/4 of a second or a second. And you could say, well, I like the beginning of that sound, but I don't necessarily like that little reverb tail on the end of it. Take it off. You can do that. You can say the release of this needs to be a little tighter. you know? Oops, did something else there, maybe change the sample. But the idea, you get the idea. You can completely mold the sound, and as long as you're careful not to mess up controls like looks like I just did, you can create new sounds and mold sounds that are in here pretty easily to get them to sound the way that you like. And you can do that by applying various envelopes to each of the samples, by applying pitch change, different start positions, so that it literally has a slight delay built into it as it starts, or it starts, directly the second that you hit the trigger. So you have that choice, the pan, the volume, EQ. So there's lots of options in here just to change individual sounds, individual samples. And then you can just randomize as well. So if you don't want to thumb through necessarily, thumb through a particular number of presets, you could say, well, I tend to like a lot of the samples that are in this one preset. What if I just randomize some of these cells and get some different sounds within the cells? And you can see even as I click closer to the left, the dice doesn't roll all the way across. And then when I click over to the right, it rolls all the way across. I guess that's another visual indication of what this says here, which is that clicking on the left side or the right side of this dice roller is significant. So I had a little technical difficulty there. And basically what I was saying was that the left side or the right side, and where you click on this slider, has a significance to the degree of randomization. So you guys are going on this wild ride with me. Had a little CPU overload error there, and as it happens, it happens. I think I need a little more memory in this computer. That's possible, but I just got a little bit of a new computer in the studio, so makes looking at something like this and playing with it much easier. At any rate, if I wanted to kind of just mess around for a few minutes and see if we can actually hear some drums and less of me talking and explaining things. No tempo, just let it flow. When you hear the sounds, you'll know how fast to go. You know what I mean? Don't limit yourself. Play however fast or slow you want. That's pretty cool. Just whatever this little thing is, whatever this kit is, it's pretty sweet. I like it. I like it. So, we're still rolling? We are rolling. Good. That's good. Like I said, you're on this ride with me. Still rolling on camera, I assume. Oh yeah, still rolling. And I really like this thing. It's creative, and as I said, you don't, at least for me personally, you tend to not want to have a click track. I think if once you know what a song is, and I think if you know how fast it needs to go, try to do it without a click if you can. if you have to play to a click, and especially if things need to be really on point, then eventually you might have to add a click. But if you don't add one. And things tend to be way more creative and spontaneous. And as I was kind of saying, if you heard, you hear the sounds and you know how fast to go. So, who cares about staying in tempo? It's kind of like coloring inside the lines. Like, who the hell fucking wants to do that? Sometimes you need to color outside the lines to understand what you're capable of, to understand what an instrument's capable of. You just have to put it to its paces. And that's what we fucking do around here. We learn by doing. That's the motto. Sunday motherfucking Funday. And all right. I think that about does it for a decent introduction. I think we can dive into much more deeper using this and just, understanding what it's capable of, understanding more about some of the samples that are included, maybe going over, I know there's some tutorials that I've seen where you can load your own samples into it. That's probably very useful for anyone that's got a huge sample library, so we might could dig into that at some point. And I think that might do it for today. Just found the hay. I was looking for that weird one. That weird one's number 7. I see where it is now. I see where you are. I hit you by accident. I hit that thing by accident. And it sounded great. Anyway, cool stuff. Catch you guys later. Next Sunday. This Sunday. Who the fuck knows? Anyway, have a great day.